Do you hear this noise? In 1999, we had never heard anything like this before. We didn't actually even really understand what was happening. There had been hard hitters of the ball before, but no one hit it as hard, as often as Lance Klusener. Years later, Ricky Ponting would tell me that just watching him range hit felt like the game was changing right in front of their eyes. And of course, Lance Klusener is also famous for one of the greatest chokes in cricket history. In fact, while history now remembers Australia for, all the World Cup wins, South Africa of the late 90s were certainly one of the best ODI teams we have ever had. Australia had been the pioneers in ODI cricket. But by 1999, it was South Africa who was the most progressive side out there. Even the Aussies were copying some of their method. And between the 96 and the 99 World Cup, South Africa won 78% of their matches. In terms of run differential, they were a +9 per wicket. The next best was Australia at 2.7. And no other team had a win-loss ratio of better than 1.5. South Africa were at 3.5. They were just one of the greatest limited overs teams of all time. There is absolutely no doubt. And in that side, they had Lance Klusener, who may have actually had the greatest World Cup of any human right up until this moment. He is now defined because of a mix-up with the tail ender, not the fact that he completely changed our sport with his batting and was also pretty handy with a white Jukes ball. Lance Klusener is remembered for stepping on a banana peel at the end of the World Cup semi-final, and not the fact that the man they called Zulu had arguably the greatest World Cup of all time. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. This show was made by HCLTech, a company that believes in partnerships so much you can read their name on the Australian shirt. This show leans in hard on data and technology, so we are proud to work with HCLTech, leaders in their field. One thing I've been thinking about for a while is, which player had the best tournament ever in a World Cup? Sadly, the first two editions had so few games it's barely worth looking at. Although Gary Gilmore's 2-game peak is epic. In the early World Cups, these are the players that I think are worth looking at. You can see there's a lot of great players who are listed here, but once we get to 1999, we start to have some lesser known players as well. If you know who Jeff Allett is, it's probably only because you've ever been to a cricket trivia night. And it's incredible to think that he and Shane Warne would ever be used in the same sentence. Rahul Dravid also made a lot of runs in that tournament, as did Steve Waugh. But I want to focus on someone else here, Neil Johnson. A player with very little international cricket who is basically known for this one tournament. This was his one great moment. He was born in Harare, but he was actually raised in South Africa, but he would go on to play for Zimbabwe because his new home had so many all-rounders like him. And who was the person who directly blocked his spot? It was probably Lance Klusener. So if you want to know how good Lance Klusener's World Cup was, well, even his backup was in the best players of the tournament. In terms of bowling, it's fair to say that Neil Johnson and him had pretty similar tournaments when it comes to average and economy. They were both medium fast bowlers who needed a little bit of assistance off the surface, and this tournament was absolutely perfect for that kind of bowler. But even then, they both had extraordinary numbers. I mean, look at where Klusener ends up here. This is a huge amount of wickets for what is really South Africa's 5th option. You don't expect this amount of wickets from this kind of bowler. Even having either of these guys on this list is pretty crazy. And yet, in some ways, Klusener was an extraordinary bowler during his career. Not compared to the other top guys, but because he was the 5th option for South Africa, or maybe sometimes the shared 4.5th option with Callis. 5th bowlers are usually hanging on, and he was way better than that. South Africa did not have a weak bowler for years. His record is almost exactly the same for average and runs as the global mark. To do that and be your team's 5th best bowler, or even your 4th best bowler, is incredible. And shall we look at his batting? Actually, first, here is Neil Johnson in the 99 World Cup. Just being on this graph is something special for him, especially as there's quite a few stars right around it. But can you guess which dot Klusener is? Yeah, he's the one all the way up here. That means for an entire World Cup, he averaged more than 100, while he struck at 122. Even one of those things would be completely amazing. Lance Klusener did the double, and he is still the only player to ever do this. Andrew Simons and AB de Villiers have both gone pretty close, but no one has ever managed to score at a run a ball while averaging 100 in a World Cup. But even if we just split it up, he has the 3rd best average in a World Cup ever, and the 7th best strike rate. Let's just look at the strike rate. This is all the players in World Cups for 250 runs, ranked by their tournament and also their strike rate. Before Klusener, only a few players had ever struck at better than a runner ball for an entire World Cup. Viv Richards, Kapil Dev, Brian Lara and Andrew Hudson. And it took 3 whole World Cups for anyone to actually reach his strike rate mark when finally Sehwag did it. And it wasn't until 2015, when playing conditions were changed and T20 had completely taken over the sport, for someone to actually score way quicker than Lance Klusener. Put it this way, in the 2019 World Cup, Jos Buttler scored at pretty much the exact same rate as Klusener had 20 years earlier. With all the advancements in sports science and professionalism and bat technology and weight and strength conditioning and T20 training and everything else, Buttler could only manage to be as good as Klusener. So in terms of batting average, strike rate and number of wickets, we have never seen anything even close to what Lance Klusener did in the 1999 Cricket World Cup. And the only thing that holds him back from being automatically the best tournament ever is that he only made 280 runs. And to understand why he only made that few, it's because in one game, South Africa batted him at number 9. Klusener took the 4th most wickets in a tournament. He averaged over 100 with the bat and struck at a rate that would still be incredible today. We have simply never seen anything like this in a World Cup. Yes, that last ball is famous, but not enough is mentioned of what went on before. South Africa should have won this semi-final against Australia, but not at the end. They had plenty of chances earlier in the game. For instance, they had Australia 68 for 4 when Steve Waugh and Michael Bevan recovered the score. But then Australia only made 213. They were aiming for 250. It was a well under par total. In the chase, South Africa were 48 without loss after only 12 and a half overs. This game should never have gone down to the wire. And I mean that in more than one way. Because with 1 wicket to get, here is Paul Rifle dropping Klusener on the boundary. The sort of mistake that Australia wouldn't normally make. I mean, the Aussies were falling on their ass at this point. So from the last over, South Africa needed 9 runs. And the first ball, Damien Fleming bowls a wide full one. If he misses his Yorker length, it's obviously not by much. And yet Klusener smashes it. That now means that South Africa need 5 runs from 5 balls. Even with 9 wickets down, they have a set batter who's just smoked a good ball to the rope. And this time Fleming comes in and he misses his slot by even more. Klusener just bashes the ball away. This is a brutal power shot. The kind that we just didn't see much of in that period. And he scores a boundary past the guy who was actually out there to stop it. The strength he had for that period was absolutely extraordinary. And because of all that, South Africa need 1 run in 4 balls, meaning the scores are now tied. Australia only need the tie to go through as they beat South Africa in the previous match. So what is needed now is that South Africa need 1 run and Australia need 1 wicket. Fleming comes back over the wicket and goes for a hard length this time. And finally, Klusener mishits one, clothing it up to mid-on. Darren Lehman collects the ball and shies at the stumps while Alan Donald is completely lost. He should have been run out, but he survives. Now remember, at this point, Australia has had 2 chances to win this game and South Africa has had only 1. Australia has choked twice already. That is almost never mentioned. But there's another thing about this game that no one ever talks about. And it's the fact that South Africa's other batters at that tournament were not particularly good. Yes, they batted all the way to number 9, but a guy who batted in that position ended up being their 3rd highest scorer. And also the guys who did score were very slow. I mean, obviously here, Lance makes them all look a bit silly. But really, each game they struggled to explode, especially early on. That doesn't make sense with a longer batting lineup. They were like Bangladesh speed with England's depth, if you want to compare them to a modern game. I think this shows it pretty well. They had the quickest scoring man ever in ODI cricket, and he made their 3rd most runs, and they were still the 4th quickest side in that tournament. The rest of them just didn't make that many runs, and they did it slowly. All tournament, the tail, Klusener really, bailed them out. This was just another game that the tail was trying to do that. However, it's one thing to expect Klusener, Pollock and Boucher batting at 7, 8 and 9 to help out. And there's another thing for Alan Donald to be that person. You're talking about someone who scored 70 first-class innings, and he never once crossed 40 for South Africa. In fact, my favourite Alan Donald batting story was one day when he was assisting SABC with a commentary stint while the game was going on, and he was on air with Neil Manthorpe, and out of nowhere there was a batting collapse, and Donald suddenly realised live on air that he had actually better get to the other side of the ground and prepare to go in and bat. So while he was clearly a wonderful cricketer, it's fair to say that Alan Donald did not think about batting all that much, as his career 4.3 ODI batting average may let you know. And people who don't bat for long periods of time, they never quite master running between the wicket, because it's not something that's easily practiced if you're not in the middle. That is why Donald overcommits here. He's not really thinking, and because of that, he should have been run out on this ball. But this moment also spooks Klusener, who should have come down and had a big, clear discussion with Donald about what their plan was. We know they did talk, but whatever they talked about, it certainly didn't help with what happened next, which was one of the most famous moments in cricket history. But we talked about Donald the batter. Let's talk about Klusener a little bit, because he wasn't a traditional batter. And I think this actually allowed him to do things that other people couldn't. His incredible physical strength meant that he could force away Yorker-length balls to the boundary, seemingly at will. At this stage, slow balls really hadn't taken over. You got them occasionally, but certainly there weren't that many bowlers who bowled them frequently. So that meant that for most bowlers, there just wasn't a length that you could bowl to Klusener, because he could hit a Yorker from basically backward point to square leg for a boundary. In fact, the only way to have even slowed him down would have been to have 6 guys on the boundary. Although, generally, that wouldn't have helped anyway, because his power wasn't like all the others. You couldn't even stop the ball when you had a fielder set out for that. He just hit it too hard. And unlike others, he didn't seem to try and hit the ball to empty spots. He just seemed to hit the ball where he wanted. And he thought if he hit it hard enough, he would get a boundary. And he was often right. And of course, if you weren't bowling a Yorker and you just tried any kind of length, he would hit for power and he would also hit a lot of sixes. Everything I've said there is really common now. But in 1999, no one was like Lance Klusener. We had never seen that kind of consistent power ever before. But it wasn't just that, it was also that he could score boundaries off balls that no one else could. And in some ways, if you watch him at the crease, he kind of looks like a slogger. But there was clearly something else to his game. He wasn't scoring quick because he was taking massive risks. His fast scoring came from his strength and skills, which allowed him to score boundaries off balls marginally not right. He may have looked like a slogger and he may have struck like one, but he actually picked the right ball like a batter. It's just that when he played a typical cricket shot, the ball did not travel at a normal speed. But Klusener's first impact at this World Cup was not with the bat. It was South Africa's first game against India, and he took 3 wickets in that match. Tendulkar, Jarrod, and Azharuddin. Not bad. He came right in at the end of South Africa's innings. India had made 253, and South Africa needed 27 runs with 5 wickets in hand from 26 balls. India were behind, but they clearly still had a chance. Until they didn't. This was his first ball. He would make 12 of 4 in this innings. And at this point in ODI cricket, a low full toss was thought to be as good as a Yorker. By the end of this World Cup, when bowling to him, no one thought that. Lance Klusener was a one-man evolutionary force, and 1999 was his big bang. South Africa's next match was against Sri Lanka, and Klusener was in at number 9. At that point, South Africa were 115 for 7, and they were looking as if they were going to lose that match. And then he came in and he smashed a boundary, pretty much first ball against Murali. He was simply playing a different game than everyone else. And of course, Sri Lanka only needed 200, and they had a real chance of passing that. But they kept losing regular wickets, and then it was Klusener who ended the innings, taking 3 for 21 again. South Africa played England in the next game, and again their top order was batting slow, and this time Klusener came in at number 7. He made 48 from 40, and no one else in the entire match had a strike rate of more than 75. His was 120. England lost heaps of wickets in the chase, and one of them will be to Klusener, who took 1 for 16 from his 6 overs. Shall we do another? South Africa played Kenya, who got off to a pretty good start, and they were 66 for 1. Klusener then ripped through their batters, taking 5 for 21. He was so good with the ball that finally he wasn't actually needed with the bat. And South Africa were 4-0. But of course, this surprised no one. But despite the fact they'd qualified for the next round, they would actually lose their next match after Zimbabwe rocked their top order in the chase. But Klusener was not out again with another 50, and he scored it from 58 balls. South Africa lost, but Klusener did not. With South Africa in the Super Sixes, their first match was against Pakistan, and Klusener took 1 wicket. They moved him down to number 8 this time, and at 135 for 6, he came out with just under 15 overs to go. Klusener was not out again, this time making 46 runs from 41 balls. He was simultaneously scoring faster than anyone in the tournament and also not being dismissed. After his first 5 innings in the World Cup, he had 210 runs from 188 balls and no average. And it felt like he was actually scoring at infinity. Cricket had never seen hitting like this and had never seen anyone having a starring role with either bat or ball in every single game of a World Cup. Finally, South Africa promoted him against New Zealand, and sadly he only made 4. But without him to save them, South Africa actually stood up on their own and they made 287. And in the chase they lost regular wickets. Klusener took the danger man Chris Cairns and then later Roger Twos as well to help clinch the match. This was certainly his worst game in this World Cup. And for what Klusener was, a fifth bowler and lower order batter, this was still an above par game. And then South Africa's tournament changed because they had to play Australia twice. In South Africa's first innings, Klusener would make 36 from 21, pulling South Africa to a decent 271. The only good thing for Australia is that they managed to dismiss the big man. But the Aussies started poorly with the bat. Mark Waugh was run out. Steve Elworthy took Adam Gilchrist and Damien Martin to leave the Australians 48 for 3. And at this point, Australia had Ricky Ponting and Steve Waugh together. Australia had to rebuild, and they stopped scoring for quite some time, scoring 15 runs in 8 overs, and then Waugh went on the attack. This meant that with one ball to go in the 31st over, Australia were 152 for 3. They had just clawed themselves back in front. But what happened next was one of the most famous things to happen in cricket, but not even the most famous ball that Lance Klusener was ever involved in. In fact, this isn't talked about much anymore, but in the history of World Cup cricket, let's say the most famous balls are Wasim to Alan Lamb, Mike Ganning's reverse sweep, the run out of Martin Guptill. You could probably throw in Stokes' overthrows and of course MS Dhoni's 6. But certainly in that group, and very high, would be the last ball run out between Australia and South Africa, and the Herschel Gibbs drop of Steve Waugh. And Lance Klusener was involved in both. This is it, Klusener's full ball squeezed out to mid-wicket and caught, and then dropped by Gibbs. Caught and dropped. You could see Steve Waugh look over and mouth something to Herschel Gibbs. The phrase you have heard is, "You just dropped the World Cup." What Steve Waugh actually said was just as ice cold, but a bit more accurate. "Do you realise you've cost the team the match?" And Waugh was right. South Africa did lose. And that meant that they had to play Australia one more time, now in the semi-final. We haven't talked much about Lance Klusener's career though, which only lasted a little bit more than 8 years. He was picked late and discarded at the first sign of a form drop. You could argue that someone with that short of career can't actually be seen as an all-time great. It's such a short period of time. You could also say that a lower middle order batter, who was the fourth or probably more often the fifth bowling option, is someone that Sanjay Manjrekar might call a bits and pieces player. That's actually a fairly accurate profile of what he was. But when you look at his numbers, he was probably the greatest bits and pieces player of all time. Klusener averaged well more than the global mark during his career with the bat. And clearly, he did it a lot faster than everyone else. And if you actually look at his numbers compared to other players in his role, 6 to 8, the rest of them averaged 22 and struck at 73. Klusener was averaging 45 and striking at 92. Players in those positions had never averaged anything like that kind of numbers. And by never, I mean 4 times in the history of the game has anyone been like this. And those players are Mike Hussey, MS Dhoni, and Michael Bevan. They were all proper normal batters. Highly skilled, conservative, normal batters with a little bit of attacking flair when they needed it. Klusener, compared to them, looked like a woodchopper who was supposed to be batting at number 10, but just no one could get out. And because of that, his strike rate is even faster than Dhoni's, despite MS playing a generation after him. And to use a modern vernacular, Klusener didn't really identify as a batter in the way those other 3 did. So even when his batting was clearly coming on, he didn't always want to go up the order. But he did actually bat every spot from number 1 to number 10. And it's worth mentioning that when he batted at number 10, it was only in the year before that he actually would destroy in that World Cup. And there's no doubt that he should have batted higher more regularly. While there might have been others in the South African lineup who were better pure batters, but his own creation was just better than theirs. And despite the looks, Klusener could actually bat. He averaged 40 in first-class cricket, and that was lowered by him struggling a little bit in test matches. If you look at his red ball batting by team, he was a top batter almost any time he wasn't playing for South Africa, and he was still fine with South Africa. But he just never thought of himself as a batter, and he actively fought being inserted up the order at times. But you could see that he did open, and when he did it, he was pretty good at it. He batted first drop a lot more, and again, was pretty good there. He was above average in both of those slots. And I think you can see that probably his best position was coming in at number 5 and number 6, because that's where he got to face a good amount of balls, and he could attack harder and for longer. I think if he was a T20 player, like in his prime, not at the end of his career, I think that's where he would have been used. Though it is worth a shout out for the fact that he averaged over 100 when batting at number 9. But also the absolute horror that someone as good as him ever had to bat at number 9. The interesting thing is that he completely changed the game with the bat, but he probably took more pride in his bowling. And with the ball, he was more of a steady seamer. He was very clever and could bowl very good cutters. But the fact that he bowled more deliveries than he batted against is a crime against nature. Even if it didn't always look like a bat in his hand at the crease was his natural spot, it 100% was. And that is what he was doing with the scores tied in the World Cup semi-final. There he was standing with a 100-run batting average, a big massive club in his hand, and 1 run needed to get South Africa into their first World Cup final. 1 run. The field up, and perhaps the most informed man on planet Earth standing in front of a bowler he had already smashed to the rope twice in that over. 1 shot would win it. And this is what happens. Damien Fleming comes in to deliver a wide Yorker. Klusener can't muscle it because it's too good a ball, and all he does is knock the ball down the ground. It could have actually been the winning run, but Mark Waugh was there, and he was one of the best fielders in the world. And not only does he get to the ball quickly, but he back flicks it brilliantly as well. But here's the bit that no one talks about. Australia made a mistake. When you're defending 1 run, you need a fielder to be right near the stumps at the bowler's end because it's unlikely any quick will ever get back to the stumps in time. And look at what happens. Waugh misses with his backhand and Fleming is nowhere near the stumps. There's no way he would have been able to effect a run out at that end. That was Australia's 3rd chance of winning the game. In fact, if Donald had run, Australia would not have been in the final. But that doesn't matter because of South Africa's mistake next. Donald claims that he told Klusener before that they wouldn't run if the ball was hit straight back. And if he did tell Klusener that, Klusener forgot. And he just takes off. Donald is completely confused at what to do. He's lost. He drops his bat, and when he finally runs, it is all too late. And Australia is panicking so much that Fleming delivers his best Yorker in a homage to Trevor Chappell's underarm and rolls the ball along the ground to Gilchrist. Donald is halfway down the wicket at this point with no bat and no hope. Australia are in the World Cup final, and South Africa fail again. Klusener remains undefeated. He will forever be not out in that game, but it is his mistake in running when he shouldn't have that we all obsess over. But the reason he was out there and that South Africa were close is because Klusener had one of the greatest World Cup performances of all time. And because he was so great all the way through this tournament, we have this game, this moment, and this memory was made. He was the last man on the battlefield for his defeated nation. He was a South African Spartan. But of course, for him, that is the wrong term. Because they called Lance Klusener Zulu because he could speak the language. And in the end, he showed the same kind of fight that the people he was named after did. When you look at his batting average, the speed of his runs, the amount of wickets he took, and the moments he was involved with, no one has ever had a World Cup like Lance Klusener did.